Hey guys, Meticulous Maynard here. Welcome to another episode on my project car here, the 2007 Forester XT. As you can see on my face, I've got a couple of battle scars. I guess battle scars is probably the wrong word, isn't it? Those are little POR spots on my face from doing all the painting underneath the car. So I guess that leads us right into the big reveal at the beginning of this episode. Let's go take a look at all the painting efforts that I put into the bottom. So I'm still starting on the bumper here. I was really focusing my efforts on the underside of the car. Trying to get all this taken care of because I'm only gonna be up under here now. I've got all of this painted in POR and she's quite shiny right now. When the POR has been around for a little while, it gets a little duller, more like that. I painted these struts in POR about 8 months ago or so they've gotten kind of sandblasted from being on the road. But when it's fresh, damn, this stuff's shiny. So really the bulk of the disassembly here in the rear end is now done. Look, you can even see the reflection of the jack stand. That guy in the paint, it's so damn shiny. That's pretty funny. So we can move on to starting to put stuff back together. Namely, I have to start fabricating brake lines that go from the front all the way up to, you can hardly see that, but the two mounts for the flexible lines. I'll put my braided lines on. And then the next thing to do is to put the gas tank up into this space. Now I may be running the brake lines through the area underneath the gas tank, so I don't want that to be in my way quite yet. So I'm going to focus on getting those lines run, because those are probably going to be deepest in there. I really hope I don't have to touch them again for a while. But once that's done, I can get the gas tank in and start to get the fuel lines mocked up going to the front of the car, so that'll be good. So yeah, let's get to work. We got a lot of stuff ahead of us. Getting a head start here with the brake lines. I've already gone ahead with my right rear line here and started to run it. You can see it go snake down, under, over, and to my little splitter block here, which this splitter block actually lived over here near the ECU harness originally for it going back into the body hole. But I figured since it'd be so difficult to try to get one continuous piece going from the rear all the way up to the splitter, or to where the splitter is now, and then over here, I mean, snaking this line alone is quite a challenge. So I did notice that when I got this all set up, I kind of just guessed on the lengths, that this wasn't actually centered on, that's the pitch stop for the motor. So I figured to make it look, cleaner and everything, I marked where my center line is going to be, and I'll take a quick measurement on this splitter block to realize how much shorter that brake line is going to need to be. So it's been a little tricky, but I've got a couple of methods for getting all this line shaped and everything. I'm actually pretty happy with how this is turning out. So to make my lines up, I'm using a combination of the Eastwood flaring tool here. This thing makes my life so much easier. I just don't have the skill necessary to make double flares with the little cone tool. I tried, and it took me 3 months, and I gave up. So I spent the money to get this guy so I can just do it and not have to worry about lines failing on me. Down here you may see a series of dies. Actually, I'm going to switch up the vise real quick and show you guys what's going on with these. So I've got now my bending dies in the vise. I have all sorts of different sizes. I made these for blacksmithing specifically, but they're really handy for bending tube as well. Because all you do is space it so that the tube fits in there nicely. And there's a kink right there in the line. But if we wanted to make a curve, we can just go in and very, very gently bend our tube like so. And then you go back over your curve And you don't want to do too much at once, because here, I'll show on the crappy end here. If you go too hard all at once, you end up smushing your line really bad. Actually, that didn't even turn out half too bad. It's a little kinked right in the hook of it, you can see, but everything else doesn't look half too bad. So, I mean, that's part of the advantage of using dies like this, is you have super good control. And then you just go through where you're routing your lines, and you measure out each location, and you do some fit-ups and everything. This really sucked, trying to do the fit-ups in this back corner here, because I basically had to start feeding it in underneath all this wiring and everything, and that was really tricky. So that's why I've kind of gone to just like, okay, put it in, make a couple measurements, figure out where everything needs to be, figure out my center point like I have there, and then I'll pull it out, do any of the changes I need to do, and then move on to put it back in to check the fit. So I'm going to actually yank this line out right now, because as I mentioned, that needs to get cut down. So this is why brake lines are difficult. Hang on, just get the hood up. So, in previous clips, I showed me working on some of the right rear brake line. I just installed the left rear, going from the ABS unit here back to my splitter. Ignore this piece. This is the left rear going back to the brake caliper. So I was forming this line and getting everything, and it was going well, and I went to install it, and you may be able to see from the sharp shadow right there on that line, yeah, I kinked it when putting it in. So that unfortunately means that whole piece is now garbage, and I need to make a new brake line. Luckily, since I've already done this once, I now have a template to make the new one, but you got to be careful working with brake line, because a single kink can just completely ruin a line. So let's get this piece out. I'm going to find somewhere in this pile over here, I think right over there-ish, I have the original brake line rather, for this, and I can just stick it in to keep any dirt and contaminants out of the actual seal. And then I'll take this piece out and just kind of form the new one based on this one, and just not kink that point again. So I'm getting a little carried away apparently, because I went through and I've actually got the new line to fit up pretty close to the original one that I had made. And the only place where it's kind of showing any evidence that it might kink is right here in this bend, which is a pretty tight radius anyways. Just in the middle there, it got a little, I felt it kind of give a little bit. So I did put it on the anvil of the vise and tried to like hammer it back out just a little bit. Usually doesn't help too much though. So hopefully this line is still usable as long as I don't kink it putting it in. Great. But I was just looking at the length that I need to cut this end off to. And of course, the next question is, oh yeah, I need to flare that line. And this is the die to flare the line. And yeah, that's the entire straight section of that line. And I even extended this a little beyond the other line to just be safe. So I'm going to have to unbend this, unfortunately, which I'm not very thrilled about. And then try to get that end flared, and hopefully all of this looks good without being a shitty flare, because this end is all work hardened now. Okay, that actually went pretty well. Now, obviously, as I had been talking about when we were working on the bench, we had a little bit of a problem right here where the line got a little thin. And to be real, it is a little thin right there, but I think it'll be fine. So it runs along and goes back there just fine. These lines mostly line up the way I want them to. I might do some fine tuning there, but nothing a couple zip ties can't fix. So I think that's actually the front brake line is pretty much done. Obviously we've got one of our lines going to the rear here, and I'll be making the other one next, and that will actually wrap up this brake line job. Thank God. I always get a little nervous with brake lines, if you can't tell. So the rear lines took significantly longer than the front lines, and actually I went ahead already and I've put a couple of zip ties along the line, and I did this fancy little trick you often see on spark plugs, where you put one in the middle to kind of separate the two lines and keep them from chafing. That way they don't rub while the car's driving and everything. So with the rear lines made up, I've now kind of put them up on the car, and I've mounted them here and then there, just so that they're kind of mocked up. They're hanging a little loose. I got a whole ton of P-clips. I'll start fastening into the body and securing this all, but I'm kind of just roughing it in place. So the next thing to focus on is going to be the routing going down the body of the car. And this is one area where I kind of screwed myself in the sense that the original provisions here and here for both my fuel and brake lines kind of gave me this nice easy place to come in, and now I have to run in this part of the car where everything's super low. And this is obviously why they originally ran it through the bodies, but it's just such a pain that if I ever had to service these again in the future, I'd have to strip the interior back out of the car like I did. So I'm trying to come up with a way that makes it a little bit easier for myself in the future if I have to do this, because with things here in New England, everything rots out. So I want to run the lines along here, but of course we're going to need to give it a little bit of protection from the elements. So I'm probably going to come up with a little sheet metal piece that maybe tucks into a little loop that I've spot welded onto the body, and then has a little spot over here where I have some dead space underneath this frame rail, and I can run a self-tapper in. And then that'll create like a little bit of 22 gauge sheet metal or something that just serves as a barrier, keeps the salt, keeps any like sand or anything from sandblasting. And that should really protect the lines and give it a bit of longevity, especially because it is this nickel copper stuff, which is pretty sweet. The only issue that I run into is obviously Subaru didn't have any provisions for this. When I get to this cross member, I end up needing to cut a hole right there. And there was already kind of a notched hole there, so I just opened it up a little bit. So it's not really taking out any of the structure. So this here's the other side of where I cut out, and it was a little rusty here, so it was kind of nice that I went in here anyways to give it a cleanup. I'm going to hit this all with POR 15 again, like the back section of the car, to clean that up. So lines come up through this hole and work their way up. And you can actually see these are the front brake lines. So if I come up and follow these up to the motor up that way, then they follow kind of a stock location, which makes it super easy. And I'm going to do the same thing with the fuel lines as well, following that all the way up there. So there's a lot of work to still do here. I think I've already kind of looked at some of the video that I've taken from that's supposed to be for this episode. I think this is a pretty good place to wrap things up. We've covered a lot of ground already here. So next episode, we'll start looking at developing this wire chase and also thinking about running the fuel lines along here as well, so I get my full bundle of all of the hard lines coming in. So obviously all the usual stuff, like, share, and subscribe. And I'll catch you guys in the next episode.